For 2 decades, Mike poured his heart and soul into a single company, a place he helped grow from a modest startup into a thriving enterprise. He wasn't just an employee, he was the backbone of his team, a mentor who trained countless newcomers, a problem solver who diffused internal crises, and a loyal soldier who turned down lucrative offers from competitors. To Mike, the company was more than a job, it was a family, a legacy he'd helped build. He knew every process, every employee, every quirk of the operation. His colleagues respected him, and his bosses relied on him, or so he thought. Mike's days were long, often stretching into late nights, as he tackled challenges with a quiet determination. He wasn't one for flashy self-promotion, his work spoke for itself. He believed in the company's mission, its people, and its potential. Over the years, he'd seen CEOs come and go, weathered economic downturns, and celebrated milestones with his team. His office was filled with mementos, photos from company retreats, a plaque for his 15-year anniversary, a handwritten note from a grateful intern he'd mentored. Mike's loyalty wasn't blind, it was earned through years of mutual trust, or at least that's what he believed. He couldn't imagine a future where his dedication would be discarded, where his contributions would be forgotten. But the corporate world is unpredictable, and Mike was about to learn that loyalty, no matter how deep, could be tested in ways he never anticipated. As he approached his 20th anniversary with the company, he felt a quiet pride. He wasn't one to rest on his laurels, but he allowed himself a moment to reflect on his journey. Little did he know, a storm was brewing, one that would shake the foundation of everything he'd built. The company was about to undergo a seismic shift, and Mike, the steadfast veteran, would find himself at the center of it. His story, one of devotion and resilience, was about to take a turn he never saw coming. Change came swiftly with the arrival of Ethan, a young, ambitious executive appointed to lead Mike's department. Ethan was everything Mike wasn't: flashy, tech-obsessed, and hungry for rapid transformation. Hired to modernize the company, he strutted into the office with a vision to reshape its image, prioritizing sleek branding and cutting-edge tech over the steady, reliable systems Mike had helped perfect. Ethan saw the company's veterans, particularly Mike, as relics of a bygone era, obstacles to his grand plans. From the start, Ethan's approach clashed with Mike's. Where Mike valued collaboration and experience, Ethan favored quick wins and bold optics. He dismissed Mike's suggestions in meetings, often with a condescending smirk, and sidelined him on key projects. Mike, ever the professional, tried to adapt, offering insights drawn from his deep knowledge of the company. But Ethan wasn't interested. He wanted a clean slate, and Mike, with his 2 decades of tenure, didn't fit the narrative of a dynamic future. Whispers of restructuring began to circulate, and Mike sensed a shift in the air. Colleagues grew cautious, unsure of Ethan's intentions. Then, one gray morning, Mike was summoned to Ethan's office. The conversation was brief and cold. Ethan, barely looking up from his laptop, announced that Mike's position was being eliminated as part of a strategic reorganization. No discussion, no acknowledgement of Mike's contributions, just a severance package and a directive to clear out his desk by the end of the day. The dismissal was clinical, as if Mike's 20 years meant nothing. Ethan's reasoning was vague, citing alignment with new priorities, but the message was clear: Mike was expendable. As he left the office, Mike felt the weight of betrayal settle in. He'd given everything to this company, and now, a brash newcomer had discarded him without a second thought. But even in that moment of shock, Mike's mind began to churn. He knew the company better than Ethan ever would, and that knowledge was about to become his greatest asset. The days following Mike's firing were a blur of disbelief and quiet rage. He sat in his modest apartment, staring at the box of belongings he'd carried out of the office, a photo of his team, a worn coffee mug, a stack of old notebooks. 20 years of loyalty, erased in a single conversation. The humiliation stung deeply. He replayed Ethan's words, the casual indifference in his tone, the way he'd barely made eye contact. Mike had sacrificed weekends, missed family events, and poured his expertise into the company, only to be cast aside like an outdated piece of equipment. Sleep eluded him as he grappled with the injustice. He thought of his colleagues, some of whom had texted cautious messages of support, unsure how to navigate the new regime. Mike wasn't one for self-pity, but the betrayal cut deeper than he'd expected. He'd trusted the company, believed in its values, and assumed his dedication would be reciprocated. Now, that trust lay shattered. Yet, even as anger simmered, Mike's pragmatic side began to surface. He wasn't a man to lash out or wallow. He'd faced challenges before: corporate politics, budget cuts, impossible deadlines, and always found a way through. This time, the challenge was personal, but Mike sensed an opportunity. He knew things about the company that Ethan, in his arrogance, could never grasp. 2 decades of observation had given Mike a unique perspective, a mental map of the company's strengths and vulnerabilities. He began to recall moments, meetings where corners were cut, deals that felt off, reports that didn't add up. These weren't just grievances, they were pieces of a larger puzzle. Mike realized that his firing wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he'd wield his knowledge not out of spite, but with purpose. He wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. Over his 20 years, Mike hadn't just worked, he'd documented. Quietly, methodically, he'd kept records of every major decision, every project, every anomaly. His office drawers and personal cloud storage held a treasure trove of information: emails, financial reports, meeting notes, and legal copies of sensitive documents. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct, honed by years in a high-stakes corporate environment. Mike had seen too many colleagues blindsided by sudden shifts to leave himself unprotected. Among his records were details of questionable practices, payments to vendors that didn't exist, contracts awarded without bids, bonuses funneled to select executives. He'd also implemented security audits years ago, tools the current leadership had forgotten but which still ran in the background, logging financial transactions and access patterns. These audits gave Mike a window into the company's underbelly, revealing fraud and mismanagement that had gone unchecked. As he sifted through his files, Mike felt a mix of dread and determination. This wasn't about petty revenge, it was about accountability. The company he'd helped build was being eroded by greed and incompetence, and his firing was just a symptom of a deeper rot. His records weren't just a safety net, they were a weapon, one he'd wield with precision. He spent hours cross-referencing data, connecting dots between suspicious transactions and key players, including Ethan. The deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. The company was at risk, and Mike held the evidence to expose it. But he knew raw information wasn't enough. To make an impact, he'd need a strategy, a way to present his findings without destroying the company he still cared about. His mind raced with possibilities, each one tempered by a single thought: this wasn't just about him anymore. Mike's apartment became a war room, its dining table buried under stacks of documents and a glowing laptop screen. He wasn't impulsive, every move had to be calculated. His goal wasn't to burn the company down but to save it from itself. He spent days organizing his evidence, creating a dossier that was both comprehensive and airtight. Each document was annotated, each transaction traced to its source. He linked payments to shell companies, flagged contracts with missing approvals, and highlighted emails where Ethan and other executives discussed personal incentives. The dossier was a masterclass in clarity, designed to leave no room for denial. Mike knew the risks. Exposing this could backfire, painting him as a disgruntled ex-employee. To counter that, he focused on objectivity, letting the facts speak for themselves. He also knew he couldn't act alone. The dossier was powerful, but it needed the right audience. Mike considered his options: the media, regulators, or someone within the company. The media could spark a public scandal, damaging the company irreparably. Regulators might take too long. The best path was internal, someone with authority and integrity. As he worked, Mike's anger gave way to purpose. This wasn't just about his firing, it was about protecting the company's legacy. He imagined the employees who'd lose their jobs if the fraud came to light externally, the clients who'd lose trust. His plan took shape. He'd deliver the dossier to the board, but only through a trusted ally. The stakes were high, but Mike felt a strange calm. He was no longer the loyal soldier, he was a strategist, and the battlefield was his to command. Mike needed a partner, someone with enough clout to ensure his dossier wouldn't be buried. He thought of Margaret, a veteran board member who'd been with the company almost as long as he had. Margaret was a rare figure in the corporate world, principled, sharp, and fiercely protective of the company's original values. She'd clashed with Ethan's flashy approach in board meetings, a fact Mike had overheard through the grapevine. If anyone would listen, it was her. Mike reached out discreetly, requesting a meeting at a quiet cafe far from the office. He was careful not to reveal too much up front, framing it as a discussion about the company's future. Margaret, intrigued and sensing urgency, agreed to meet. Over coffee, Mike shared just enough to pique her interest. He'd uncovered issues that threatened the company's stability, issues tied to recent leadership decisions. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She'd had her own suspicions about Ethan's rapid changes. She pressed for details, but Mike held back, promising to deliver hard evidence if she could ensure it reached the board. Margaret agreed, impressed by his restraint. Back home, Mike finalized the dossier, encrypting it and preparing a physical copy for added security. He knew this was a point of no return. Handing over the evidence meant trusting Margaret to act, but it also meant risking exposure. If Ethan or his allies caught wind, they could spin the narrative against him. Still, Mike felt a surge of resolve. Margaret was his bridge to the board, and the board was his path to justice. He packaged the dossier, set a time to deliver it, and prepared for the fallout. The game was on, and Mike was ready to play. The board meeting was a high-stakes affair, with Ethan presenting his vision for the company's future. Unbeknownst to him, Mike's dossier had already reached Margaret's hands. She'd reviewed it in private, her shock growing with each page. The evidence was damning: financial misconduct, conflicts of interest, and a pattern of deception led straight to Ethan and his inner circle. Margaret waited for the right moment, then requested a closed session. As Ethan was ushered out, she distributed copies of the dossier to the board. The room fell silent as the directors absorbed the contents. Charts showed illicit payments, emails revealed backroom deals, and audit logs exposed unauthorized access to funds. The implications were staggering, not just for Ethan, but for the company's reputation. The board's reaction was swift. They questioned Margaret, who explained how Mike, a loyal veteran, had compiled the evidence after his unjust firing. Some directors were skeptical, suspecting a personal vendetta, but the dossier's rigor dispelled doubts. It wasn't the work of a bitter ex-employee, it was a meticulous exposé by someone who cared deeply about the company. The board voted to suspend Ethan pending an investigation and launched an immediate internal audit. They also agreed to keep the matter confidential to avoid a public crisis. As the meeting adjourned, the directors were shaken but grateful. Mike's intervention had exposed a cancer within the company, one that could have destroyed it. Margaret sent Mike a brief message: "It's done. They're acting." Mike read it, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. His plan had worked, but the story wasn't over. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Ethan's suspension was announced internally as a leave of absence, but the truth spread quickly among senior staff. Within days, the audit confirmed Mike's findings: millions in misallocated funds, contracts tied to Ethan's allies, and evidence of personal enrichment. 2 other executives were implicated and quietly let go, their departures framed as mutual agreements. The board moved fast to contain the damage, hiring an external firm to conduct a full review. Employees whispered in break rooms, piecing together rumors. Mike's name surfaced, not as the fired veteran, but as the whistleblower who'd saved the company from collapse. The board, meanwhile, grappled with a larger question: how had this gone unnoticed? The answer pointed to their own complacency: a reliance on flashy leadership over steady oversight. They owed Mike more than an apology, they owed him gratitude. The audit's findings were kept under wraps, but the board knew a public leak could tank the company's stock and client trust. They issued a vague statement about strengthening governance and moved to rebuild internally. For Mike, the days were tense. He'd stayed under the radar, avoiding contact with former colleagues. Margaret kept him updated, assuring him the board was acting decisively. The speed of the response surprised even Mike, who'd expected bureaucratic delays. But the evidence was too clear, the threat too severe. As the dust settled, the board began to see Mike not as a victim, but as a savior. His actions had preserved the company's future, and they weren't about to let that go unrewarded. Mike, however, wasn't celebrating yet. He knew the real test was still to come. A week after the board meeting, Margaret called Mike with news. The directors wanted to meet him, not to question him, but to make an offer. Mike arrived at the corporate headquarters, a place he hadn't set foot in since his firing. The boardroom was a far cry from Ethan's sleek office. It was old school, with mahogany tables and portraits of past leaders. The directors, a mix of seasoned executives and newer faces, greeted him with a respect he hadn't felt in months. They got straight to the point. Mike's dossier had saved the company from disaster, and they wanted him back. Not as a middle manager, but in a new role, Chief Security Officer. The position was tailored to Mike's expertise, giving him oversight of financial, technological, and operational security. He'd report directly to the board, with authority to audit any department and access to strategic decisions. It was a powerful role, a testament to the trust he'd earned. The directors acknowledged their failure in allowing Ethan's rise and Mike's firing. They saw his loyalty, even after betrayal, as a rare asset. Mike listened, his face unreadable. The offer was tempting, but he wasn't naive. Returning meant stepping back into a world that had burned him. He asked for time to consider, and the board agreed, emphasizing that the role was his to shape. As he left, Mike felt a mix of vindication and caution. The offer was a victory, but it came with strings, responsibility, scrutiny, and the challenge of rebuilding trust. He spent the evening weighing his options, knowing that whatever he decided, it would be on his terms. Mike didn't rush his decision. He knew the board's offer was a chance to reclaim his place, but he also knew the corporate world's pitfalls. If he returned, it would be as a leader, not a pawn. He drafted a set of conditions, each designed to protect his autonomy and ensure the company's integrity. First, he demanded complete independence in his role as Chief Security Officer. No one, not even the CEO, could override his audits or investigations. Second, he requested veto power over technological decisions, knowing how often flashy systems masked vulnerabilities. Finally, he insisted on a direct line to the board, bypassing the chain of command to report findings or raise concerns. These terms weren't just about power, they were about safeguarding the company from future Ethans. Mike met with the board to present his conditions, expecting pushback. To his surprise, they agreed unanimously. Margaret later told him they saw his terms as a blueprint for reform, a way to prevent the complacency that had nearly sunk them. With the agreement signed, Mike prepared to return. He felt a quiet thrill, not of revenge, but of purpose. His new role would let him protect the company he'd helped build, ensuring its values endured. As he packed his old work bag, he thought of his colleagues, many of whom had reached out with messages of awe and support. Mike wasn't returning to gloat, he was returning to lead. The board's swift acceptance showed they understood his worth, but Mike knew the real work lay ahead. He'd have to navigate politics, rebuild trust, and prove his vision. For the first time in months, he felt ready. Mike's first day back was surreal. He walked through the company's glass doors, past the reception desk where he'd once been a familiar face, now a figure of quiet legend. Colleagues glanced his way, some offering nods of respect, others whispering as he passed. The news of his return, and the reasons behind it, had spread. Mike didn't linger on the attention. He headed to his new office, a corner suite with a view of the city, a far cry from his old cubicle. His role as chief security officer was already in motion, a stack of audit reports awaited him, and his first board meeting was scheduled for the following week. As he settled in, Mike reflected on his journey. The pain of his firing, the nights spent building his dossier, the tension of waiting for the board's response, it all led to this moment. He hadn't sought revenge, though the thought had crossed his mind. Instead, he'd chosen a harder path, exposing the truth to save the company he loved. That choice had paid off, not in applause or headlines, but in a deep, personal satisfaction. Mike's victory was silent, felt in the weight of his new responsibilities and the respect in his colleagues' eyes. He thought of Ethan, now gone, and felt no malice, just a lesson learned. Intelligence, patience, and preparation had triumphed over arrogance. As he opened the first report, Mike knew his work was just beginning. He'd saved the company from itself, but now he'd ensure it never strayed again. The future was his to shape, and he was ready to lead with the same loyalty that had carried him through 20 years.